Your first view is probably from the freeway. Heading south on I-94, you see a pale brick church whose twin spires are capped with fading gold leaf. The landmark is named for St. Stanislaus, and it's the first Polish church in urban America.
St. Stan's made national history, but it also marked an important shift in Milwaukee's development. Although Germans were still dominant after the Civil War, more and more newcomers were arriving from Southern and Eastern Europe.
They came from Poland in particular, but also from Italy, Greece, Russia, and a host of other nations. Their region was rocked by economic troubles, political unrest, and for some groups, persecution. Mounting pressures made it prudent to leave. And the promise of industrial jobs in Milwaukee and other cities attracted new Americans by the millions. Polish immigrants were in the vanguard. By 1890, they were second only to Milwaukee's German population in size. One of their first concerns was to establish a Catholic church. In 1866, 30 Polish families started St. Stanislaus Parish in a tiny South Side chapel they bought from a group of Germans. 6 years later, with a population explosion underway, the congregation moved to its present home on Mitchell Street. Parish priests were soon baptizing a dozen babies every week. St. Stan's was the heart and soul of Milwaukee's largest Polish community. The South Side came to life as a densely settled neighborhood of workers' cottages, corner saloons, and family-run bakeries and butcher shops. Mitchell Street became its downtown, just as 3rd Street had for the German North Side. Known as the Polish Grand Avenue, Mitchell resembled the main street of a small city. But not all Polish immigrants were Southsiders. St. Hedwig's Church on Brady Street was the city's second Polish congregation, and it remains a prominent East Side landmark today. A third settlement was unique in America, Jones Island. Beginning in the 1870s, fishing families from the Baltic Sea coast of Poland, the Kashubs, colonized the windswept peninsula at Milwaukee's front door. Joined by other Europeans, the Kashubs made Jones Island a regional center of commercial fishing. Setting their nets for trout, whitefish, perch, and herring, they brought home 2 million pounds in a good year. While their countrymen across the river took jobs in local industries, the islanders continued a way of life they had known for centuries in Europe. Jones Island was the closest thing to an urban village Milwaukee has ever known. Whether on the island or the mainland, one trait that set the Poles apart was their desire for homes of their own. The Milwaukee Sentinel noted the tendency in 1874.
Usually the first money they can call their own is put into the purchase of a lot, on which they mean to erect a house as soon as possible. They have a strong prejudice against paying rent.
The newest groups get the oldest houses. That's been the unwritten law in America's cities for generations. But the Poles broke that law. Instead of renting homes in hand-me-down neighborhoods close to downtown, they bought small lots on the city's edge and covered them with small cottages. But they didn't stop there. The next step was to convert the cottage to a Polish flat. When finances permitted, the immigrants jacked up their houses and bricked in half-basement living units beneath them. single-family homes became duplexes almost overnight. The steep stairs and the ground-level windows are its hallmarks. But the flat had a psychological impact as well. Many Poles had not been of the landowning classes in Europe. By buying the little lot and putting up the little cottage, they became landowners. By converting it to a Polish flat, they became landlords as well. One result was a dramatic increase in density. My grandmother was raised in this house. Her father died of tuberculosis when she was just 9, leaving her mother to raise 6 kids on a washerwoman's wages. What saved the family from ruin was the fact that they owned 5 living units on this lot, 3 in the front house and 2 in the back. One, the smallest of course, was theirs. The other 4 were rented out. When my grandmother lived here, there were on this single narrow lot 27 kids, enough to field 3 baseball teams.
Polish flats tell one story about the immigrants. Catholic churches tell another. And the contrast in scale is often startling. St. Stanislaus was the mother parish of more than 20 Polish Catholic congregations, and their steeples stand as benchmarks in the community's outward expansion. The grandest church of them all is the Basilica of St. Josaphat. In the late 1800s, St. Josaphat was probably the largest congregation of any faith in Wisconsin. Nearly 12,000 people worshipped in the combination church and school on Lincoln Avenue, enough to fill a small city. In 1896, with the pews filled to overflowing, the parish broke ground for what is still the largest church in Milwaukee. Hoping to save money on building materials, the congregation bought the old Chicago post office and had it dismantled stone by stone. 500 flat cars were needed to bring all the salvage up to Milwaukee, and virtually everything was used, even the heavy brass doorknobs that still bear the government seal. Construction crews labored for 5 years. When the church was finished in 1901, only one dome in the country was higher, and that was on the U.S. Capitol. St. Josaphat's debt was just as enormous. The parish flirted with bankruptcy for nearly 10 years, and it took another 15 to pay off the last loan and finish work on the interior. But the results were stunning. In 1929, St. Josaphat was declared a basilica, the equivalent of all-star status for a Catholic church. It remains the closest thing Wisconsin has to a European cathedral.
Building St. Josaphat was a labor of love. The men of the parish helped dig the footings. The women carried dirt away in their aprons. Nearly 1/3 of the debt was owed to members who had taken out second mortgages on their homes and loaned the proceeds to the building fund. If other lenders had foreclosed, the immigrants would literally have lost the roofs over their heads. And so the real story of the Basilica is its people. Despite endless economic struggles, they raised a magnificent monument to faith and a towering statement of community. The majestic church and the modest homes were built by the same people. Decades later, the contrast in scale continues to astound.
Milwaukee was Europe once removed in the late 1800s. The city's German accent was pronounced, and the Irish maintain a strong Celtic presence in the heart of the city. The Third Ward, between the river and the lake, was their first neighborhood. As the Irish moved up, however, they also moved out, generally to the west. Merrill Park, west of 27th Street above the Menominee Valley, became their new stronghold. St. Rose Church was their spiritual home. The list of charter members reads like the Dublin phone book. The Milwaukee Road provided them with a living, either in the shops or on the trains. Merrill Park's heroes were the engineers who drove locomotives across the plains and over the mountains of the Great West. The Irish exodus from the Third Ward was hastened by a disastrous 1892 fire. Fanned by gale force winds, the blaze took several lives and left 2,000 people homeless. When the smoke cleared, the Third Ward entered a new phase as an Italian neighborhood. The Italians were part of the same surge of Southern and Eastern Europeans that brought the Poles to Milwaukee. They added their own flavors to an ethnic stew that was growing richer every year. The great wave of Italian immigration began in the 1890s. Most of the newcomers were from Sicily, an island as poor as it was beautiful. They worked with their backs and hands, but some Sicilians entered the street trades, particularly the fresh fruit and vegetable business. Beginning with small pushcart operations, several families opened wholesale houses on the Third Ward's Broadway, a street better known as Commission Row. The community's anchor was just 3 blocks away, Madonna di Pompeii, known to generations of Milwaukeeans as the Little Pink Church. Our Lady of Pompeii was the focal point of elaborate festivals held several times each summer. Food, fireworks, and solemn processions attracted virtually everyone in the community. The tradition continues today as Festa Italiana, the oldest and for many years the largest of Milwaukee's lakefront ethnic festivals. Proceeds from Festa made the Italian Community Center possible. Located in the Third Ward, the center is literally a homecoming. The first Greek immigrants arrived on the same wave as the Italians. Most were bachelors who took entry-level jobs in local industries. Others opened tobacco shops, restaurants, and other small businesses. Their dream was to make money in America, return in triumph to Greece, and live out their lives in comfort. Most discovered that their exile was permanent. One immigrant told the story of a short-order cook who rented an apartment from his family. This man, our tenant, had come over here with the same idea as the others, to make money and go back. He had 2 daughters who were babies in Greece. When he would get ready to go back, he would buy a couple pair of shoes for a 2- and a 3-year-old. Well, something would happen and he would stay. But the following year, he would buy shoes for a 3- and a 4-year-old. Something would happen again and he would stay. This went on for years. The girls were in their 20s when he brought them to this country. And when we finally cleaned out his apartment, there was a big trunk full of shoes. A new church signified the community's permanence. The Bachelors organized Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church in 1906 and later built an ornate Byzantine church on Broadway. It became a haven for families in joy and in sorrow. Funeral photographs were a way to share grief with relatives in the old country. In 1961, Annunciation moved to a new home on 92nd Street. Its architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. Eastern European Jews built a distinctive community of their own. Thousands came from Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, and Poland, settling near the heart of Old Kilbourne town on the west side of the river. There they organized at least 7 synagogues at the turn of the century, all of them Orthodox. They also took advantage of programs at the Milwaukee Jewish settlement, which offered English classes, athletics, literary circles, children's clubs, discussion groups, and a Sabbath school. The settlement's services included cooking classes taught by the legendary Lizzie Kander. In 1901, she published her favorite recipes in a user-friendly guide she called the Settlement Cookbook. 2 million copies, and many revisions later, it's still an American standard. A young girl named Goldie Mabowez was typical of the Jewish immigrants. She was 8 years old when her family moved into an apartment on Walnut Street. Goldie found Milwaukee spellbinding, especially the 3rd Street shopping district near her home.
I was delighted by my pretty new clothes, by the soda pop and ice cream, and by the excitement of being in a real skyscraper, the first 5-story building I'd ever seen. In general, I thought Milwaukee was wonderful. Everything looked so colorful and fresh, as though it had just been created, and I stood for hours staring at the traffic and the people. I spent the first days in Milwaukee in a kind of trance.
Goldie was first in her class at the 4th Street School. And she continued her education at Milwaukee's State Teachers College, now part of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Years later, as Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir became perhaps the most famous ex-Milwaukeean in the world. Other groups made their mark on Milwaukee while Golda was growing up. Many were from the Slavic countries of Eastern Europe, a family of nations that stretched from Poland in the north to the former Yugoslavia in the south. Poles were the largest contingent of Slavs, but there were several other groups. Slovaks settled in the Kilbourne town area at first, and then planted another community in Pigsville, a unique west side neighborhood named for an early pig farm. Croatian immigrants, like the Slovaks, were heavily Catholic. The heart of their community was Sacred Heart Church on the near north side. Walker's Point, with its abundance of industrial jobs, had particular attraction for Slavic immigrants. Slovenes, and a smaller number of Croats, worshipped at Holy Trinity Catholic Church on South 4th Street, an old German parish. Serbs built a small Orthodox church, St. Sava's, practically across the street. After World War II, St. Sava's parish erected a striking Byzantine cathedral on the southwest side, right next to a legendary Milwaukee gathering place, Serb Hall. Walker's Point was a neighborhood of nations, and that heritage is preserved in its churches. Greeks, Bulgarians, and Ukrainians joined the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes in Walker's Point, and earlier groups, Germans, Norwegians, Czechs, and the Irish were present as well. There might have been a dozen different languages spoken in a single block. The fruit of all this diversity many years later is the greatest concentration of historic churches in Wisconsin, perhaps in the entire Midwest. The near south side skyline is practically a thicket of steeples.
The churches of Walker's Point reflected a fundamental fact about Milwaukee. It was Europe once removed. In 1890, immigrants and their children made up 86% of the city's population. That was the highest proportion in America. The national average was only 33%. Milwaukee was emphatically a city of immigrants. But there was another side to the coin. Milwaukee remained a city of industries as well. The growth of its ethnic groups reflected the growth of its economy. By the late 1800s, changes in the industrial world had created new prosperity, and with that prosperity, new problems.